everyone. Episode 10 of the Around the Bed podcast. We have the pleasure of having Prosasty here. Today, we're going to be talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and data, and I guess data science around this topic. Good morning, Prosasty.
Hi, good morning, Blake. Good morning, everyone.
Here, why don't you give us a little bit of your own background so people have an idea kind of where you're coming from?
Sure. So, yes, I do come from a very diverse background. My name is Prosasty. I have been working with all the big five banks, Citi, HSBC, recently SVB. Come from a very engineering background, but for the last 20 years, I've pretty much been focusing on data management and data analytics for most of my career. I live in New York, and this is where I went to college as well.
Hmm. I'm a West Coast boy myself. I've grown up in the Bay Area, gone to school in the Bay Area, and worked in the Bay Area. So it's East and West here on this podcast this morning. But just before we kind of delve into it, what kind of got you interested in this topic? Because you've been thinking about this way longer than just this podcast, obviously. When did these maybe I guess I know I'm going to kind of steer off of for a second, but DEI has been around for maybe like 4 or 5 years. How long have you kind of thought about some of the data around this and maybe just the topic as a whole?
Yeah, so although DEI has been around for 4 or 5 years, I don't want to give up my age, but it has been a part of my life because of the diversity and where I was born from the day of birth. Like I'm a girl child born in India.
Mhm.
Then I basically, when I was 20, I decided to come to America on my own without any help or without any support. Without having any relatives out here, based on just like, educational background and good scores. So, all of it, like throughout my career, I think DEI has been a very big factor in my personal life. And as they say, you are who you are. So when it is in your personal life, it kind of carries with you in every aspect. So
Mhm.
I think I do carry a extra lens when I look at DEI, not from only the perspective of around me in my personal life, but also from workplace. And wherever I can, I try to contribute towards it so that we can or raise awareness towards it. Because this is something very close to my heart. And I feel
Mhm.
honestly, genuinely, that we can all be in a better place if we adopt and accept it more than we do
Mhm.
today.
No, I mean, this is a kind of exactly why I wanted to do something around DEI because I think it's very easily dismissed without being understood. And I think it's very important. A lot of just in my own workplaces, we'll kind of delve more into it later, but the more diverse you have a workplace, friend group, but especially in the workplace, you just bring a lot of different thoughts, a lot of different points of view. Um, and it makes things a little bit more rich, just as,
Agree.
yeah. But here, I think because we both have some background with technology, and you especially with a lot of larger financial institutions. Um, what steps do you think that tech companies could take to promote DEI in the workplace?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, they can't be too busy to not spend a dedicated time for DEI. I
Hmm.
think most of the time, you're like, you're too busy. We are generating revenue. We are too busy. We are implementing this critical project for the regulators. We are too busy because of X, Y, and Z reasons.
Hmm.
I think that is where the danger starts when you don't look at it as an equal stakeholder. That's something that needs to be done. There is a really nice survey from McKinsey 2020 that I was reading over the weekend, which says by fact and statistics that 35% of the company's productivity, employee morale is increased if you have better DEI.
Mm.
So that is also a bottom line number, right? That is also in a way tied to revenues. So we can't look at it as something that is not quantitative and only qualitative. So I think both dedication and devotion is needed at this point to bring that awareness in the workplace and at every level. Like it has to be at an entry level when you're bringing in interns. It also has to be at the senior most C level, and at every levels in between. I feel like they say, right, there are like the four C's of diversity, DEI as well.
Mhm.
It needs to be communication, it needs to be career, it needs to be capital, and it also needs to be the connections and the community. So
Mm.
I think that's very critical. And as an organization, I think those are some of the things that there needs to be on the focus. The perspective of how you look at it needs to be different.
Okay. Hmm. No, that's definitely, I like the four C's. I never thought about that concept. And kind of one of the biggest things that I hear mentioned to me repeatedly, even by different people trying to deal with DEI inside of some of these larger companies, is like unconscious bias. How do you think unconscious bias, like the recruitment, the promotion practices in the tech industry or finance, kind of affect these? And what strategies do you think companies could take to not just mitigate, but get rid of this unconscious bias?
Yeah, I think we are all humans at the end, right? And sometimes we may not even realize we have unconscious bias in us. Uh, but we all need to be better humans and we need to overcome that, right? Unconscious bias, firstly, we need to absolutely understand it has a very, very negative effect, not only in the for the company, but also for its people and for everything. So, firstly, we need to see that as a bad event.
Hmm.
Secondly, I think unconscious bias, I mean, it's very funny because I went to Columbia Business School. We
Hmm.
had people in our class who were off Broadway artists. There was a doctor in class who came to do an MBA because he wanted to change his career. And then there were people with engineering and other background. So there was so much diversity in the class. And that is something we were programmed. Like if you're going to MBA, you will have diversity in the class. But the moment we graduate out and we come to the workforce, I wonder what happens to that programming.
Hmm.
It seems to be lost somewhere. So I think we there needs to be a conscious effort that if we are trying to put diversity, like even when you form groups and core groups to do a project together in your MBA class, you put diverse people together. So then, in the real world, where does that knowledge that is learned get lost, right? So I think where the it gets lost is really that deliberate effort. We try to be in the comfort zone, we try to be on the peace zone, and we say, okay, it's easier if we do not. And the problem with the unconscious bias is also it's not illegal. Like if you
Hmm.
do an employee discrimination, by law you're protected. You can
Hmm.
actually go to a court. But unconscious bias is something which is not still like penalty. There's no penalty for it because it's not illegal to do it. So furthermore, there needs to be a more deliberate effort where I will try not to be unconscious bias. I may not know it. Let me spend some time to understand, am I only liking people of my type? If
Hmm.
somebody is saying something else from a different diverse background, am I taking it very differently? Do I think the person is weird? Things like that, I think
Hmm.
as leadership, we need to do and then funnel it down to the bottom. Then definitely can be a lot of awareness trainings I think the companies can do in order to increase the awareness of this unconscious bias that may in many people exist without them even knowing it.
Hmm. Absolutely. I think one thing that might be helpful for the people that are listening is like, what are some common examples that may not seem malicious, that may not seem very in your face, that happen pretty commonly?
Yeah, I have seen that more in the sales side of the business. when I was in the top five banks, where there is an unconscious bias that somebody who can talk about, say, a particular sport or a particular thing, they would be doing better sales over breakfast and getting better client. But that worked at one point of time because the marketing and the sales strategies have changed now. Now
Hmm.
people are going more for the content and who knows what, not the traditional sales. Like we are in the tech industry, right? We're not selling a car, or we are not really selling something where you need to put your sales and a lot of talking and a lot of a nice way of wrapping sentences up to sell a product or to sell a technology solutions. Now it's all about content. And does it really matter on how well you're familiar with the accent, how well you're familiar with the way of style of talking, if you are actually, if your product is actually good. So those are some of the examples. I think unconscious bias, we always feel like,
Hmm.
if the client is of a certain background, maybe the same background person will be doing better if they are selling it. But that's used to be the case maybe for certain industries, but not for, definitely not for technology. Technology, data, finance is very driven by who knows their stuff, like
Yeah.
what is the content.
One thing I would say though that could be that I've seen is like even in technology, with some of the larger companies, that I've still seen that old way of doing business. The let's go to lunch. Oh, let's go grab drinks. Oh, let's talk out the deal. Things like that. And that's an interesting point you brought up because I just never, even now, I just never thought of it as one of those kind of forms. And that's no, that's really, I thank you for bringing up that example because it does raise a good point. If you had, like, for example, you would have had to watch football or that baseball game, and if you never grew up with it, then that's not like a super fair expectation to be putting on people. Um, that kind of puts them behind the curve. And you're right, it's not illegal, but it's damaging in a way because you're pushing out a lot of potentially really talented people if you only want people that understand certain cultural cues and things of that kind of nature. And I think this is good because it sort of leads into um, what else we were trying to talk about. We're like, what are some of the common challenges and barriers to achieving DEI in the tech industry and finance? Um, and how do you think those can be overcome or mitigated? Because I'm sort of a cynical person. I don't know if they can 100% be overcome, especially the unconscious bias, because it's a constant, constantly evolving thing, just like people.
Yes, no, we just have to think about it as very negative. In terms of barriers and challenges, right? I'll start with the barriers, right? Um, the barriers come because we don't have any goals really. We need to have set some goals. What are the metrics that I would measure that
Mm,
DEI has been achieved, right, in an organization, or some sort of a maturity graph? Okay, this is where I want my organization to go, and this is how I want my people to feel about it. Definitely, there needs to be buy in from the leadership. There needs to be proper awareness trainings, like I was mentioning. There needs to be a budget dedicated for it. This should not be an extra activity. If everything is spent and we have extra dollars, then we do it. No, it needs to be upfront and a budget dedicated for it. And there should not be any cultural resistance to it. Like if we feel like, no, it's not, we're doing well, things have been working for us for 100 years. I mean, why do I need it? Like that's in a way a blockage, right, from leadership or somewhere. What is this new thing? So I think their cultural awareness and like that openness, that is something that everybody is doing, and now it is proven by statistics, data, and surveys that we absolutely do need to do it, right? So I think a lot of times there is a good best intentions, but the intentions don't map to a tangible result. I think
mhm.
that's the dot that we need to connect in terms of like, barriers. In terms of challenges, I feel we need to be honest and real with ourselves, right? I have seen organizations in my life where they have they, they say they have overcome DEI. They do have a diversity officer who is a female, and they do have an HR officer who's a female. But we do need to be a little bit more real about it and get there eventually. I mean, a lot of organizations absolutely have female leadership in critical key positions, but I think we need more diversity in the C levels across all positions beyond HR and diversity officers. I think that is where I think the diverse perspective kicks in, like all kind of I was again reading a survey, and the survey was mentioning it's only 3% of C suite today that are women of color. 3% is really very less. If you look at the workforce, there are many, many, many women, and I don't know the percentage of women of color. And my personal observation has been the same as well. Very little women of color are actually there. So again, gender is one part of diversity. There is age. There is, diversity of ethnic background. There is diversity of many seven other topics, right? But the bottom line, I think, is we need to see it with a real lens.
Hmm.
We need to be real, honest, and about it. Like, are we really diverse? And that's a question I think a lot of us need to, people in the position to influence need to ask in their respective organizations.
I think that is a very good point. One thing I would also that that makes me kind of think about is like in a large company, the how do you put it? The promotion sort of grouping is very slow, and usually you're getting people that were like they've been around for a long time. So they're like the last of their breed or their generation in many cases, still in the workforce, especially in really large companies. Um, Maybe a couple are like an exception, but I would probably say that most C suite people are, minimum going to be like 40, 45 in a large S&P 500 company. What I've seen going to some of the local conferences and things is that some of the startups is where you're seeing a lot more. Maybe it's not intentional DEI, but just the practicality of like, hey, I saw a lot of like, I was at the MDS conference about like 2 months ago, and there was a lot of I noticed a lot of women founders, which I was, even me living in Silicon Valley my whole life is not, it's just not a common thing, or it's less common. And it was kind of nice to see, at least among some of the youngest, startup founders, business owners, things like that, there's some changes, but it would be interesting to be like, hey, what's a template of this, not only for some large S&P 500 company, but like across the board? Like, what are some of the, like when we talk about data, we talk about like the end result. What are some of those data points that you want to see, for example?
Yeah, I think you know what your question makes me think a little bit about Silicon Valley Bank, Lehman Brothers also, right?
Hmm.
And sometimes what happens is post the impact, we kind of think about what could have been better, right? Or even better if, right? And I can't emphasize about diversity in the key roles,
Hmm.
because and by diversity I mean, like you mentioned, right, age also, uh, diversity, and that leads to something that I personally believe a lot. Like, yes, we have those categories of diversity: gender, age, ethnicity, and others, but then there is also a diversity of thought, right? Which is like, if there is a fresh idea, if there is a different idea, then is there, if there is anything else which is different, what we need to recognize that as well, because
Hmm.
diversity of thought is very critical to bring a different perspective into the table. Most of the time we like to be non-confrontational, so we like people of our own because we know that we are comfortable with them. They would probably agree to what I say or what I don't say. But what we need to recognize is people are from very different from one another, right? Like they
Hmm.
think differently, their perspective is different, their ways of seeing things is very different, and which is very useful. Like you see today in the entrepreneurship world, right? If you think differently, then only can you find a solution for different things in the world. Their experiences are different. People have gone through different things in life, personal, professional. Their backgrounds are very different, the working style, communication, leadership style, decision makings are very different, which is very helpful and critical. Because if you make a decision for a very critical aspect of an organization and you are making a decision in a different way, that could lead to something very grateful, right? Something very great. So, personality types could be different. Like, I have been through my work, I actually have led a team globally in all the three continents. And I have seen the pace, the way, approach, and the style when I had a meeting in Singapore or Hong Kong or China versus when I had a meeting in Latin America or in North America. Right? We're
Hmm.
all talking of the same topics, but the style, execution, the delivery is very different. And that's where I think, the diversity of thought comes from. Like diversity of thought, the value systems of different people combined with our diversity of gender, age, and all, I think is a very, very powerful combination, which an organization today should absolutely tap into. And if somebody honestly tells me that my productivity of the organization would increase more than 30%, I don't know why I would not do that.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I would just end by saying that is where the actual revenue lies. If you are looking into a growth path, if you're looking into something bigger for your own organization.
That's no, I mean, that's a very interesting point, and I don't mean to put you on the spot with that thought, but diversity of thought, there was actually one of the heads of Google's human resources. This was like 7 or 8 years ago. Brought this up is like you could have a room full of what is it? 40 was she made a joke. She's like you could have a room of 10 40-year-old white men and you could have a very diverse group of people, and I was like, but I just feel like that's was like a little bit like, I don't really know. And I think some people still attach onto that idea of like, hey, you don't know me, you don't know my background. And I think it's like we kind of want to get away from that and be like, hey, I get it. Like, everybody has their own experiences, but when you bring in people with like really different experiences and a really different way of looking at things, you get really different results.
Yes.
It,
Yeah, and I think we need to spend time on this, right? Like I was mentioning in the beginning, right? We can't be too busy. We are busy like, oh, well, first my criteria is to get through the team to a different level. First, my criteria is to get through the project. First, my criteria is to be the peace bearer so that I kind of put the project or the team or the company into a different location. There will always be 50 excuses to not
Mhm,
do DEI, but there needs to be a deliberate effort to do it because it's proven by statistics, it's proven by result
mhm.
that that is the best way to go. Like, why would you not do it in a world where everything is becoming so DEI?
No, absolutely. And one again, I apologize because you're just making me think of new interesting stuff. So the current structure we have, we're having like a chief diversity officer and things like that. If you're like, bam, you're the CEO of put S&P 500 company here, how would you change the structure, just the actual organizational structure of dealing with DEI?
Yeah, I think like I mentioned in my earlier on, right? It has to be at every level. I wouldn't change one thing. I will change the whole pipeline. I would change and integrate diversity into interns. I would integrate diversity into C-level suites. I would increase diversity into promotions. I would increase diversity into the entire chain so that it's not in selected areas of focus, but it's organically across the board. And I think that is something that we can, definitely we should be doing.
Absolutely. Hey, well, I want to thank you for taking the time out today to give this talk. I think a lot of people in my network, it'll give them a fresh perspective and maybe a fresh idea around DEI. And really, if anybody has any questions, I would actively encourage people to reach out to Proshasti. She has a lot of experience in the data field, and I'm sure this could maybe even blossom into new, interesting conversations. Because you never know who might see this.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Blake, for this opportunity. Bye.
Thank you very much. Have a great day. Okay. Bye bye.